is often forgotten, I have to say, is that NEC was one of the pioneer examination boards in the world in the 1970s, producing examinations which tested in the examination room the application of knowledge, problem solving, and critical thinking. We sometimes forget that, but Kenya had those skills. Maybe that's the subject of a future WERK seminar that we might invite Ruth to join in with us. She was also at the Kenya Literature Bureau in the late 80s as a deputy managing director. But today, Ruth will bring us insights from her World Bank days, especially on the outcomes of all the work that has been done on girls' education and gender and education and boys' education, the outcomes that we are living with today. There are global lessons to be learned, and there are lessons for Kenya. There are strategies that will take us to be a significant player on the world stage, that will take Kenya to be that significant player, and there are others which will not take us there. So we would like to ask Ruth, where does girls' education fit in? What is its significance? How does it and will it impact on the lives of Kenyan women in the future and on the holistic development of Kenya? I know that Ruth has many answers to such questions. How, we are asking Ruth, can research help us forge ahead? So we are honored today to hand you the microphone, Ruth, in the context of this WERK debate. We appreciate in advance the time that you're giving to us. We invite you to stimulate us, to challenge us, to make us think in work and beyond work, so that we focus our research into efficient channels. We can learn from you, and we can learn from your experience.
It is actually a great privilege to be here this afternoon and to see so many friends and colleagues. What Hannah didn't tell you is that she was my colleague at the bank. It's a small world. What was not said earlier when David Court was introduced is this: thanks to David that I went to Harvard. And not only did he cover my expenses, but he guided me and mentored me and basically made me do what he wanted me to do. And for that, I'm grateful. Ivy and Lucy, as the UN rightly said at the time of her death, your mother is not a victim, she is a hero. We are here today to honor her memory. We do so by continuing to serve the underserved in education, and as she did in Somalia, and by lifting our game as advocates of education, we should create a tide that will lift all Kenyan women. We mourn with you, but we also admire your courage. And we know that you will honor her memory by being the daughters she dreamed you to be. Charles Dickens said in The Tale of Two Cities, "It is the best of times. It was also the worst of times. It was the spring of hope. It was the winter of despair. We had everything before us. We had nothing before us." I think of that quotation when I think about the progress we have made as women, not just in Kenya, but globally. Because on one hand, it is indeed the best of times to be a woman in Kenya. Women and girls are healthier, they are better educated than they were 30 years ago. They have work and income generating opportunities that were unimaginable in the past. And several constitutional opportunities that have enhanced the freedoms and participation and voice, in spite of the ongoing discussion on the two-thirds gender rule. Even that will come to pass. In 2013, there were almost as many girls in secondary education as they were boys, 55 to 57, which, by the way, is a much higher ratio than the sub-Saharan Africa average, which is 32 to 36. Okay, now I can start this. I'm going to focus mainly on the, education, even as I talk about other issues to do with women and development. And I find that quotation very meaningful when I think about education, that it is indeed the seed and the flower of development. It's a sine qua non of development, but it's also blossoms when development is robust. And because, I'll come back to that, I wanted to go to that first, to basically demonstrate the progress that has been made. That graph, I think, which is from the Demographic and Health Survey 2014, shows that by and large, there's total parity until you get to the tertiary level, where there's a significant drop, not just in terms of girls enrollment, but also in terms of overall enrollment. Girls constitute about 30% of the tertiary enrollment, but for the rest of the education system, we are close to parity. It's worth noting, though, that very low enrollment at the early childhood development is the topic for another day, and because it's so critical to have strong ECD programs, because they provide such strong foundation. So it's something to watch out for. The education people from the ministry, that we are not enrolling large enough numbers. So it is the best of times in that sense. We've come a long way, and even as we complain, even as we get concerned as we should not forget how far we have come. As I was thinking about these remarks, I thought back on when I was at the University of Nairobi, and we were doing, in our class, literature class, there were 8 of us. Dr. Ashukia was one of them. And when you think of how large the classes are now, you realize just how far we have come, hopefully not just quantitatively, but also qualitatively. And some of the benefits that we associate with education are beginning to accrue. We know the multiple effects of educating a girl. Increased education has, intergeneration benefits. Mothers who are educated almost invariably have better educated children, healthier children, and so on. And this is being borne out in Kenya. Some of the benefits are beginning to come through. Women with some secondary education marry about 5 years later, and delayed marriage has the obvious benefit of ensuring healthier children and also allowing the woman to have a bit more education and hopefully get some work. So those with no education getting married at about 17 years, those with a bit of education 22 years, and those fertility rates also are decreasing as women education and wealth increase. The total fertility rate decreases from 6.5 women children per woman with no education to 4.8 with those with some education, and to a further 3 among those with a secondary or higher education. So, and this is not insignificant, because the benefits of bringing up 6 children as opposed to 3, and what it does in terms of allowing the woman to have extra domestic activities, again, cannot be underestimated. And additional data from these reports indicate, the children are less stunted, they are healthier, and so on and so forth. Again, we can discuss those, because they are this is empirical data, quite recent from Kenya. So something is happening, and we have something to celebrate. But having said so, these are also the worst of times for women in Kenya, and more generally globally. Progress has been very slow and uneven and inequitable. the return to girls' education have lagged behind the phenomenal gains in access. As I was thinking about these remarks, two words kept coming to mind. One was a mirage, and the other one was Sisyphus. You remember Sisyphus? Sisyphus was this guy who was cursed by the gods, and his punishment was that he would be rolling a stone up the hill. As soon as it comes down, he pushes it up again, and he did that for the rest of his life. And sometimes I feel that that is reminiscent of a situation as women. We put in a lot of effort through the MDGs, through the work of many of you in this room, to get girls into primary school. And we got there. We now have almost 100% of the girls in primary school. But what is the value of a primary education? So we start working hard. We get about 50% of the eligible school age into secondary education. But no sooner do we get there, then you realize to really get a secure job, you need a university degree. So you feel like you're chasing a mirage, and it can sometimes be discouraging. And it's not just in terms of the economic returns. As primary and secondary education expands, inequalities are pushed to higher levels of education. So we have as many girls as boys in primary and secondary, but only 30% of women at the university level. And as Professor Mugeda will tell us, by the time you get to engineering and science courses, I think it's about 17%. So the air gets thinner for women as you go up. And even as it does so, it is doing so in programs that have higher returns. Secondly, the representation of women in top leadership and companies and in boards is still very much against women. Nothing illustrates this better than the ongoing dance around, as I call it, the discussion in Parliament around the two-thirds gender rule. Why on earth are we unable to pass this rule? Other than that, we have very deep-seated biases that stop our parliamentarians from voting for it. What I found interesting last night is that they know it is wrong. So something has happened. At least they understand it's wrong not to do it. So about 20 of them did not either vote yes or no. Because it's, you can see the struggle there. And this is not just a Kenyan phenomenon. There are structural obstacles, lifestyle choices, institutional issues, and so on and so forth that hinder the advancement of women. For example, if a woman wants to run for a governor seat or a Senate seat, think of the amount of social and financial capital they require, the networks they require, the behavior change they require. And that may, in many ways, acts as a deterrent. In 2013, there were only 19 women seeking to hold the Senate and governor positions out of 237 candidates. And as we know, not a single one got in. The decks are stacked against them, even on something as simple as that. Sorry, I should have perhaps spoken to a couple of these before I go too far. I'm saying the obvious here. Why do we bother? Why do we take education of girls and women so seriously? It goes back to the value of education in itself from Adam Smith, a man educated at the expense of much labor may be compared to an expensive machine, so productivity. And in the highly competitive world, globalized economy of today, quality education is one of the most valuable assets. So that's education generally. And then, why does the education of girls matter? I'm saying this, the obvious, but just to make sure we are on the same page, it is a wise investment. It's a gateway to family welfare, as we just demonstrated. It's smart economics. 50% of our nation's skills and talent pool is the women. It's good for business. Women make a better at building teams. Companies that have a balanced gender in their corporations tend to be much more rounded and more productive, and we'll come to that maybe in a minute, and it leads to sustainable development. I'm just saying the obvious things there. When I think of a mirage, I started thinking about how far we've come, all the way back to the UN Charter in 1945, Mexico, and so on. Copenhagen, Nairobi was held here, and some of us were actually involved in the Women's Decade Conference in Nairobi. UN Women has been established. We have a South African heading it right now. The bank finally got into even looking at the economic rationale of investing in women in 2012. And last year we were celebrating Beijing Plus 30. And the African Union declared 2015 the year of women economic empowerment, and so on and so forth. And I'm saying, what are we getting from all these conferences, all these declarations, all these pronouncements? And is there something we could be doing more of to have a cumulative impact from all these efforts? That one just illustrates that the problem of women at the top, in corporate boards, in executive committees, is a global phenomenon. Other than in Norway, where you've got about 35%, in Japan it's only 2%, in India it's 5%. So there is a structural global issue that makes it increasingly more difficult for women to get to the top. In Kenya, I think I got the number, it's about 9% of the top companies are headed by women. So the question is, why is it that we are so successful in getting so many girls into school, in primary and secondary, but we are unable to push to that second level? I'll come to quality in a minute. Because the slow progress where girls and women are not obtaining the returns to education, where girls and women are not able to get to the top echelons of whatever it is that they are doing, creates a lot of missed opportunities for the country at large. I'll cite a few. In addition to what I cited earlier, health benefits, family welfare, economic welfare, research, more recent research, is demonstrating that women's participation in decision-making and political processes has a proven positive impact. Societies in which women have greater economic and political participation tend to be more stable. In the book, Have the Sky Turning Oppression into Opportunity for Women Worldwide, the authors argue that when women gain a voice in society, there is evidence of less violence. They argue that one way to solve some conflict-ridden societies is to bring women and girls into schools, the workplace, and business and government. There's a study that Nike Foundation carried out in Kenya, which estimated that investing in girls would potentially add $3.2 billion to the economy. Remember that study, because I'm a girl. Yes. And then in one of the most convincing statistical studies to date, the World Bank did a study together with Columbia University, and they found out that the relationship between female participation in government legislatures and the level of perceived corruption, they said, we find a strong negative and statistically significant relationship between the proportion of women in a country's legislature and the level of corruption. When I read that, I thought of Rwanda, and I thought of us. And the finding is actually supported by the Mo Ibrahim Index of Africa Governance country rankings. If you look at the countries that rank at the top, they also have very high gender women representation at the legislature and in top levels of government. In a series of reports published by Women International, called Stronger Women, Stronger Nations. They argue that women play an important role in establishing peaceful and stable societies. Their report on Kosovo states that incorporation of women's views into traditionally male-dominated political processes is vital to achieving sustainable peace, democracy, and prosperity. And finally, on this section, research suggests that the security of women and the security of states are linked. 14 of the 17 countries that score the worst in the OECD Social Institution and Gender Index also experience conflict over the past 2 decades. Again, I found that significant, and you can think of several of them: Somalia, and the gender issues. A lot of the Muslim countries where women still don't have enough elbow room, and what it does in terms of destabilizing through the inequality and so on. The point of those remarks is essentially to say, okay, when we were trying to convince our male colleagues that it's important to send girls to school, we were looking at the low-hanging fruit. It's good for them. It will increase their income. It will make healthier families and so on. And that is important, and that still holds. But it is these more broader and transformative benefits that we stand to lose when we lose the momentum in terms of gender development, in terms of incorporating women into the entire economic and social strata. Coming back to Kenya after some 20 years, one of the things that struck me is I didn't know how to enter back into the country. I missed the networks that I had found so valuable before, networks that had nurtured me, that had helped me to grow, that had given me the space to express ideas. I'm not going to mention years here because you might start getting worried, but way back, a few of us, David Cott was one of them. We used to meet in each other's houses once a month, David, about once a month, and just take a research topic and discuss it, about 10 of us. Sometimes it will be on education. Usually, most of the time it was education. Sometimes it will be environment because, what is this? His name, this guy in Harvard now, was doing environment. But I remember Mike Savage. And we just chat, and it helped to sharpen ideas. It helped to focus our energies on things that were important. We used to have a professional business women's group, and we would have lunches and meet and chat. We used, there was of course the Maendeleo ya Wanawake that used to be very, very effective, and so on. And I came back, and I couldn't find any of them as an entry point to share ideas, to share experiences, to get to know one another, because it is through those kind of organizations that individuals grow, that ideas become incubated. Admittedly, there are lots of women's groups now, but they seem to have taken a more investment angle, which is important, but perhaps I don't know the extent to which it has become, it is an incubating ground for ideas, because what we need, what I have missed and what I have found has changed is the incubation of ideas, the nurturing of ideas. If this was then, and it is very easy to be nostalgic, many of us would have been meeting informally and formally to begin to question the education curriculum review that's going on, and to begin to think about what do we want to send as an input to the ministry. I don't know what forum there is, besides going into the formal meetings, how you provide an alternative voice that has sort of deliberated on some of these issues. And that I found striking and worrisome. And I've written here, when did we lose the script? Because we used to be some of the most dynamic set of women and a few men in Africa. Some of the changes that took place in this country did so because there was dynamism, there was energy, but there was also a building upon each other. During the 1985 Women's Decade Conference, I did a small study. I was saying to myself, we have had women at the University of Nairobi for about 15 years by 1985. There have been quite a few women who have gone through that university. At that time, there was only one university, as you recall. But where are they? I don't see them in government. I don't see, where are they? So I interviewed, I think most of them actually. And I was basically asking very simple questions. How would you feel if you are appointed permanent secretary? And they would laugh and say, who would think of that? It won't happen. Have you ever applied for a job and been rejected? Say, no. And yet, very few women were going beyond the director level. And what we found out is that there was a lot of self-selection. If you are in government and you're in job group M or K or whatever, and your husband is job group B, everybody will know that you're earning more than him. So sensibly, they opted out and went to the private sector where nobody would compare and contrast. And some of those